You can tell a lot about a person by how they argue. Some people walk into a conversation with a desire to understand. They're calm, curious. They seek clarity. But others, they don't listen. They don't absorb. They just wait. Not for your point, not for your emotion, but for their turn to fire back. It's not a discussion for them, it's a duel. And the moment you pause even to breathe, they jump in. Not with insight, but with noise, with volume, with rehearsed lines that have nothing to do with what you just said. Because they weren't listening, they never planned to. They came armed with ego, not ears. You speak, thinking you're connecting. You lay out your thoughts, your facts, your truth. You think this is a conversation between two people willing to learn something. But then they respond with something completely unrelated. You realize they didn't catch a single word. They were scanning your tone, your posture, the length of your sentence. Not the message, not the meaning. They were picking apart pieces they could twist. They weren't trying to connect. They were trying to corner. You keep trying to meet them in the middle, but there is no middle with someone who needs to be right at all costs. When someone refuses to truly hear you, what you're having is not a conversation. It's a performance, and they're the only one who rehearsed. They don't care what you're actually saying, only how they can spin it to protect their fragile little narrative. They twist your intention. They interrupt your flow. They don't respond to your words. They react to their own fears. You're not fighting for truth. You're fighting to be heard, and that is a fight you will always lose when the other person's ears are closed. They might nod while you speak. They might throw in a sarcastic, "Yeah, sure?" Just a fake engagement. But beneath it all, they're just biding time, holding their breath, waiting to launch their comeback like a missile. Not because it makes sense, not because it addresses the issue, but because it feels powerful to them, because it gives them the illusion of dominance. They interrupt before you finish your thought. They cut you off mid-sentence. Not to ask, not to clarify, but to bulldoze, to dominate, to win a conversation they never entered in good faith. It's not about listening for them, it's about controlling the energy. And when you speak truth to someone who only wants to be loud, your truth dies in their silence. It hits a wall. It echoes in their ego. You'll say, "That hurt me." They'll say, "You're too sensitive." You'll say, "That wasn't fair." They'll say, "You always do this." You'll say, "I just want to talk." They'll say, "Here we go again." That's not listening. That's deflecting. That's mockery dressed as dialogue. It's a war they declared before you even opened your mouth. And what makes it worse is, you're not even trying to fight. You're trying to solve something. You're trying to clear the air. But they're too far in survival mode to see the truth as anything but a threat. Arguing with someone who refuses to listen is like yelling underwater. You're making sound, but nothing's getting through. It's draining, it's disorienting, it makes you start questioning your own sanity. You repeat yourself, thinking maybe they didn't hear you. You rephrase your words, thinking maybe you weren't clear. But clarity isn't the issue. Respect is, emotional maturity is. And when someone lacks both, no amount of patience, kindness, or reason will help. You think if you just explain it one more time, maybe they'll understand. But they're not failing to hear you by accident. It's intentional. It's control. They don't want to understand. Because understanding would require accountability. It would require humility. And that's something they will never give you. Because in their mind, being wrong is weakness. Being wrong is exposure. So instead, they cover their ears with pride and their mouth with arrogance. You're not crazy for feeling unheard. You're not emotional for walking away. You're wise for recognizing when someone is incapable of real dialogue. You're smart for stepping out of the spin cycle. Because arguing with someone who won't listen isn't strength. It's self-betrayal. It's you pouring your clarity into a bucket with no bottom. It's you giving your voice to someone who only came to talk over you. And the saddest part, you probably cared. You probably loved them. You probably gave them chance after chance, hoping maybe this time they'll meet you halfway. But you can't build bridges with people who burn them as you speak. You can't reach someone who's so scared of truth, they'd rather destroy the conversation than grow from it. You can't teach someone to listen when all they crave is dominance. There's power in walking away from noise. There's strength in choosing peace over performance. When someone shows you they don't value understanding, believe them. Don't get pulled back in. Don't lower yourself to match their chaos. Silence speaks louder than screaming. Distance is clearer than explanation, and sometimes the smartest thing you can do is stop explaining yourself to someone who already decided they don't care to understand you. Some people would rather protect their ego than pursue the truth. You could hand them facts, evidence, logic, clear as day, and they'll still refuse to budge. Because admitting they're wrong doesn't just challenge the argument, it challenges their identity. It pokes at their insecurity. And for people like that, being wrong is not a moment of growth, it's a wound to the ego. So they deny, they twist, they gaslight. They try to make you feel like the unstable one, all to avoid the simple act of saying, "You're right. I was wrong." That's too threatening for them. That's too exposed. And when you find yourself arguing with someone like that, what you're really facing isn't a lack of intelligence. It's a wall built from fear, pride, and deep internal insecurity. You might go into the conversation with good intent. You might think, if I show them the truth, they'll understand. So you come in with calm energy. You lay down the facts. You stay grounded. But they don't meet you there. Instead, they get louder, more aggressive. They start pointing fingers. Not because they don't get it, but because they refuse to accept it. Because accepting it would require them to confront something they don't want to see, that they were wrong, and that someone else saw it before they did. These are the kinds of people who treat conversations like battlegrounds. To them, being right is a weapon, and admitting fault feels like surrender. So even when the truth is obvious, even when it's irrefutable, they'll still dig in their heels and double down. You could show them video evidence and they'd say, "That's not what happened." You could quote their exact words back to them, and they'd say, "That's not what I meant." Nothing penetrates because they're not open. They're not curious. They're not there to grow. They're there to protect their false sense of superiority. It's exhausting. You end up feeling like you're talking to a brick wall that throws bricks back. You start questioning your own clarity, your own perception, your own sanity. Because when someone's committed to being right, no matter what, they'll rewrite reality to fit their version. And if you're not grounded, you'll start to think maybe they're right, maybe you did misunderstand, maybe you did overact. That's the power of stubborn ignorance. It doesn't just reject truth, it manipulates it, bends it, weaponizes it. You see it in how they pivot. Every time they're cornered by logic, they shift the conversation. You call out a behavior, they accuse you of being too sensitive. You highlight an inconsistency. They suddenly want to talk about your past. They never actually engage with what you said. They just run from it. Because they're not brave enough to sit in discomfort. They'd rather shift blame than sit in truth. And that's the kind of person who will never grow, because you cannot evolve while defending your flaws as if they're virtues. And here's what's really dangerous about it: they can seem confident. They can speak with conviction. They might even make others believe they're intelligent. But that's not intellect. That's performance. That's manipulation wrapped in arrogance. Real intelligence is humble. Real wisdom listens. Real growth is willing to say, "I got that wrong." But when you're dealing with someone who refuses to do that, you're not dealing with a thinker. You're dealing with a performer. And their goal is not resolution. It's control. You try to stay calm. You try to stay patient. But eventually you realize it's not about reason anymore. It's about ego. And when you threaten that ego with truth, it fights back. It mocks you. It shames you. It attacks your character. And in doing so, it exposes itself. Because people who can't admit they're wrong will always reveal their weakness the moment they feel cornered by truth. And their defense mechanism: denial, blame, deflection. That's how they survive. Not by adapting, but by refusing to face themselves. You'll notice they never apologize. Or if they do, it's empty. It's mechanical. It's laced with sarcasm or manipulation. "I'm sorry you feel that way" is not an apology. It's a dismissal. It's a tactic. Because true accountability requires vulnerability. And vulnerability feels like death to someone who's built their identity on always being right. So here you are, trying to be the adult in the room. Trying to talk like two humans. But every word you speak is a threat to the mask they wear. And the more honest you are, the more defensive they get. Not because you're wrong, but because they can't handle what being wrong might mean. It might mean they're not as smart as they thought. It might mean they're not as righteous as they pretend. It might mean they have work to do, and that's something their pride just can't tolerate, so they reject everything. They mock your logic. They raise their voice. They cut you off. They make you the enemy for even daring to hold up a mirror. Because their self-image is so fragile that even the smallest crack feels like humiliation. They'd rather shatter the whole mirror than see who they really are. It's not your job to drag someone to the truth. It's not your role to fix someone who clings to being right over being real. There's a difference between ignorance and arrogance. Ignorance can be educated. Arrogance refuses to learn. And when you're up against that kind of mindset, walking away isn't giving up. It's leveling up. You can't correct someone who takes everything personally. You can't reason with someone who thinks disagreement is an attack. It doesn't matter how softly you speak or how carefully you phrase your words. When you're dealing with someone who lives in a constant state of emotional defensiveness, every sentence you say becomes ammunition in a battle you never signed up for. You're not allowed to question, to challenge, to clarify. Because the moment you do, their ego explodes. Their mood shifts. Their tone changes. Suddenly, you're not having a discussion. You're managing a tantrum. This is what makes the conversation impossible. You say one thing and they hear something completely different. You point out a behavior. They accuse you of calling them a bad person. You try to discuss an issue. They say you're always criticizing them. You tell them how something made you feel. And suddenly you're the villain. It's not the words you used. It's their fragile filter. They're not listening to you. They're listening to their own fears. And every word that touches that fear becomes a personal threat. It's emotional immaturity at its peak. And the more you try to de-escalate, the worse it gets. You lower your voice, and they say you're being condescending. You try to validate their feelings, and they accuse you of being manipulative. You step back to cool off, and they claim you're walking away because you don't care. There is no winning with a person who treats every conversation like an assault on their identity. Because to them, growth is humiliation, and accountability is betrayal. You can't build anything solid with someone who can't separate who they are from what they do. You bring up an action, they collapse as if you're attacking their whole character. You're trying to fix something, they're fighting to protect their pride. And the deeper the issue, the deeper their defensiveness. You can't even mention how something hurt you without it turning into a full-blown character assassination on you. They spin the spotlight around, they rewrite the narrative. And suddenly, it's no longer about the issue at hand. It's about how you made them feel for even bringing it up. You start tiptoeing. You start editing yourself. You leave out the truth because you're afraid of how they'll twist it. You walk on emotional eggshells, not because you're wrong, but because you're tired of triggering the storm. This is what it feels like to argue with someone who takes everything personally. It's exhausting. It's disorienting. You're constantly in damage control, managing their emotions more than addressing the actual issue. And every time, it's the same outcome. They're offended, you're confused, and nothing ever changes. And here's the twist. They use their hurt feelings as a weapon. They use their offense as a shield. I can't believe you would say that to me. Becomes a manipulation tactic, not a moment of vulnerability. Because if they're the victim, they don't have to be accountable. If they're the wounded party, they don't have to apologize. They don't have to reflect. They just have to deflect. And they're masters at it. They'll cry, yell, withdraw, blame, anything to shift the focus away from the truth and back onto their pain. It becomes a cycle. You express, they explode. You clarify, they twist. You apologize for how they reacted, even though you didn't do anything wrong. And they walk away feeling righteous, while you walk away feeling small. And over time, you stop bringing things up. You suppress your truth to protect their comfort. You keep the peace by keeping silent. But that silence starts to rot. It turns into resentment. You lose parts of yourself just trying not to offend someone who's offended by reality. You think if you're just more patient, more gentle, more careful, maybe they'll finally hear you. But that's the trap. You're managing their emotions like it's your responsibility. You're regulating their fragility while your own needs go ignored. And the saddest part, they don't even notice the emotional labor you're doing. Because people like that aren't focused on balance. They're focused on control. They want to dominate the emotional space. And they do it by making everything about how they feel, even when they're the one in the wrong. You're not allowed to express anything that doesn't flatter them. You're not allowed to have needs that challenge them. You're not allowed to say, "That hurt me," without them spinning it into, "You're saying I'm a horrible person." That's emotional hostage taking. That's narcissism disguised as sensitivity. And if you don't recognize it early, it starts to train you to self-silence. Train you to carry guilt that isn't yours. Train you to see your boundaries as betrayal. The truth is, someone who takes everything personally is not capable of honest dialogue. Because the moment you get close to anything real, they implode. And the louder their emotions get, the more you abandon yourself just to stabilize them. That's not a relationship. That's a prison. And the more you feed that cycle, the more power you give them. They learn that all they have to do is get upset, and you'll shut down. They learn that your truth isn't strong enough to survive their outrage. And the moment they learn that, the conversation is no longer mutual, it's manipulation, it's emotional blackmail. And the longer you stay in that dynamic, the more you forget what real communication even feels like. There's a difference between someone reflecting on what you just said and someone repeating themselves like a broken record, because they don't actually want to hear you. You speak and they don't respond to what you said. They respond to what they already decided in their mind. You clarify, you explain, you even simplify. But it doesn't matter. They're already rehearsing their reply while you're trying to create understanding. That's how you know you're arguing with someone who isn't interested in resolving anything. They just want to win. And here's the thing. When you repeat yourself without adjusting your thinking, without processing what the other person just said, you're not communicating, you're posturing. You're not building a bridge, you're building a wall. And that wall has nothing to do with logic. It has everything to do with pride, with control, with a refusal to open up and actually listen. Because listening would require vulnerability. It would require humility. It would require admitting that maybe, just maybe, you don't have all the answers. And that's terrifying for someone whose whole sense of self is built on being right. They'll repeat the same flawed argument 5 times, 10 times louder each time. Thinking volume makes it more true. It doesn't. It just makes it more exhausting. And that's the real trick. They wear you down. They don't win the argument because they're smarter or more insightful. They win because you're too drained to keep going. You run out of energy before they run out of ego. And they take your silence as proof that they were right all along, when in reality, you just stopped talking to protect your peace. That's the cost of engaging with someone who repeats without reflection. It's not just the waste of time. It's the erosion of your mental clarity. You start to doubt yourself. You start to wonder if maybe you're missing something. You go over the conversation in your head, analyzing what you said, trying to figure out what went wrong, and it hits you. Nothing went wrong. You were just speaking to a wall. A loud, stubborn wall that's more interested in being heard than in hearing anyone else. And it's not just frustrating. It's dangerous. Because repetition without reflection becomes propaganda. They repeat it so often, even you start to feel crazy for not agreeing. That's how manipulation works, not always through anger or insults, but through relentless consistency. The same flawed logic, the same false narrative, the same emotionally charged comeback. Over and over and over, until you start to shrink, to disengage, to just let it slide. And when you let it slide, they win. Not because they were right, but because you gave up. It's a power move. It's not communication. It's domination disguised as conversation. You think if you just explain it one more time, maybe they'll get it. But they won't. Because they're not trying to get it. They're trying to exhaust you. They're trying to make you feel like the problem. Because as long as you're off balance, they're in control. As long as you're defending, they're winning. As long as you're trying to explain yourself, they never have to explain anything. You try to elevate the conversation, and they drag it right back down to their level. You bring up facts, they bring up feelings. You bring logic, they bring volume. You bring structure, they bring chaos. They're not engaging, they're avoiding. They're not debating, they're distracting. And if you don't recognize that pattern, you'll spend hours, days, years in the same loop, having the same argument with no resolution, and wondering why nothing ever changes. It's not you. It's not your delivery. It's not your logic. It's not your timing. It's them. They're not capable of self-reflection. They're not interested in growth. They don't want truth. They want control. And control doesn't need logic. It just needs volume, repetition, and your silence, because that silence, that's what they're waiting for. That's when they get to stand tall thinking they won something. But there's no victory in being loud and wrong. There's no strength in repeating ignorance until everyone else goes quiet and you start to see the bigger picture. This isn't just about one argument. This is who they are. It's a personality trait, a communication style, a belief system. They don't evolve. They don't adjust. They just repeat and repeat and repeat. And if you're not careful, you start to become numb to it. You start to disengage completely. Not because you don't care, but because you've accepted that they won't change. And that's when the damage sets in. You stop speaking your truth. You stop holding boundaries. You stop expecting clarity or growth. You just endure. And endurance without hope? That's the beginning of emotional surrender, and they like that. They feed off that. Because your silence, your exhaustion, your surrender, it all reads to them like agreement. They think they've convinced you. But they haven't. They've just outlasted you. They've used repetition as a weapon. And the only way to win with someone like that is not to play. Not to engage. Not to step into the same script expecting a new ending. Because the ending is always the same. They get louder, you get tired, and the truth gets buried under their noise. Some people don't take responsibility for anything. Ever. No matter how obvious it is, no matter how much proof is sitting on the table, they will find a way to make you the problem. You could show them facts, screenshots, recordings, and still they'll find a way to twist it. And the worst part? They won't even blink. They'll dodge blame so effortlessly it's like a survival instinct. You're standing there trying to solve the issue, trying to have an honest, adult conversation, and they're flipping the script faster than you can track it. Suddenly, the thing they did is now somehow your fault, and you're on defense for something you never even did. This is what it looks like when you argue with someone who can't hold themselves accountable. They are slippery. It's like wrestling with fog. Just when you think you've pinned the issue, they switch topics, shift tone, or act offended. It's all a tactic. It's all deflection. Because if they actually took accountability, they'd have to look in the mirror. They'd have to admit their choices, their mistakes, their behaviors. And they can't handle that, because that would mean admitting that their image isn't as perfect as they want to believe. And when someone builds their whole identity around being right, being good, being smart, accountability feels like a threat, so instead of owning their mess, they hand it to you. They spin it around. Suddenly, you're too sensitive, you're overreacting, you're the one starting drama. And now you're explaining yourself instead of confronting them. That's how they win. Not by logic, but by confusion. They throw you off balance and keep you there, and the longer you stay there, the more power they gain. Because now, instead of calling out their actions, you're just trying to defend your reaction. You're in damage control. You're trying to make peace with someone who doesn't even believe they did anything wrong, and this is the truth. Some people are allergic to accountability. They see it as weakness. They see it as an attack. They think saying, "I messed up," is giving you ammunition to use against them. So instead they go on offense. They turn it around. They find some old thing you did, some unrelated issue, something they never even brought up before, and suddenly that becomes the focal point. It's not about what they just said or did. It's about what you did 2 months ago, or what they think you meant, or how you made them feel. Even if that has nothing to do with the issue at hand, and if you're not grounded, if you don't know your worth, your mind starts spinning. You start wondering if maybe you really are at fault. Maybe you really did say it wrong. Maybe you are being too harsh. But you're not. You're just being manipulated by someone who refuses to stand on the truth. They would rather burn the entire conversation to the ground than say, "You're right. That was on me." Because to them, that sentence feels like humiliation. It feels like a loss. It feels like power slipping through their fingers. So they do anything to avoid it, even if it means rewriting history, even if it means emotionally steamrolling you, even if it means destroying trust again and again. And here's what happens when you keep engaging with someone like that. You become exhausted. You start to shrink in conversations. You start keeping your feedback to yourself. You start tolerating the same mistakes over and over, because you know what's going to happen if you bring them up. You'll get blamed. You'll get guilt-tripped. You'll be made to feel like the problem, so you let it slide. 1 time, 2 times, 10 times, and before you know it, the standard for the relationship has dropped to the floor. Not because you don't care, but because you're tired of the war that accountability brings with this person. You have to see it for what it is. This isn't someone who just doesn't like conflict. This is someone who uses avoidance as a strategy, who uses guilt as a shield, who uses blame as a weapon. And it's not random. It's calculated. They know what they're doing. They know how to pivot the conversation. They know how to trigger your empathy. They know how to bait you into defending yourself instead of holding them accountable. And every time it works, it gets harder to speak up the next time. That's the danger. Not just the immediate argument, but what it does to your confidence. What it does to your self-trust. Over time, you stop speaking up, not because you don't have a voice, but because you've been conditioned to believe your voice will be used against you. That's not a conversation. That's control. That's emotional sabotage. And if you don't recognize it, you'll keep giving people passes for behavior they have no intention of fixing, because they don't see it as a problem. They see it as a win. And they'll keep winning as long as you stay in the ring with them, trying to have a fair fight with someone who's playing a dirty game. They don't want resolution. They want relief from responsibility. They want you to absorb the discomfort they refuse to face. And if you let them, they will take it every time. Because it's easier to let you carry the weight than to grow up and own it themselves. They've made an art form out of blaming others. It's not ignorance, it's avoidance. It's not weakness, it's refusal. And you cannot build peace with someone who treats accountability like poison. There are people who can't stand to see someone else lead. They want to win, even when they're wrong. And one of their most toxic tactics is to steal your ideas, mimic your thoughts, and then twist the narrative to make you look like the follower. They echo your words like parrots, but never give credit. They copy your delivery, your points, your logic, then throw in just enough spin to pretend it was theirs from the start. You'll say something insightful in a conversation, and 5 minutes later, they'll repeat it back louder, bolder, and with that smug confidence like they just invented fire. And the worst part is other people believe them. Because they talk with volume instead of wisdom. They talk over instead of with you. Sit there wondering, do they even realize they're doing it? Oh, they do. It's intentional. Because what they want isn't clarity. It's control. They want to dominate the moment. Not to contribute, but to outshine. They treat every interaction like a game where the goal is to come out on top. Even if that means stepping on the very words you just gave them. Even if it means insulting the very framework you laid down, while standing on it to elevate themselves. They're not looking for truth. They're looking for applause. They don't care about the substance. They just want the spotlight. You've probably seen it happen. You express a boundary, or a new idea, or a way forward, and they instantly minimize it. They act like it's overreacting. They act like it's extreme. But then a week later, they're preaching the same idea to someone else like it was their concept all along. That's not forgetfulness. That's positioning. That's manipulation disguised as intelligence. That's someone who wants to borrow your wisdom without carrying your weight. They want your mind, but not your presence, because your presence makes them insecure. You remind them of where they fall short. So instead of admitting it, they mimic it. And instead of collaborating, they compete. This kind of person is not just hard to argue with. They're dangerous to argue with. Because they're not focused on resolving anything. They're focused on flipping the narrative so that they look superior. Even when they're wrong, they'll argue with a level of confidence that makes others doubt you. It's not because they're smarter. It's because they don't care if they're wrong. They just care if they look right. They mistake arrogance for intellect. They confuse imitation for originality. They don't want to learn, they want to win. and that's why you can never reason with them. You're playing chess, and they're flipping the board. They don't hear you to understand. They hear you to steal your talking points. Then they weaponize those same points against you. You call them out for something they did. They twist your phrasing and say, well, that's what you do too. You share an experience. They interrupt to top it. You show them a pattern. They act like they noticed it first. And when you challenge them, they deflect. They get loud. They laugh. They mock. They'll do anything except actually sit with what you're saying and take responsibility. But here's the most frustrating part: they convince other people. Not because what they say is true, but because they say it with conviction. They don't rely on facts. They rely on delivery. They raise their voice. They speak in absolutes. They mock nuance. They drown out truth with performance. And if you're not careful, they'll make you question your own perception. They'll make you feel like you're the one who's copying, like you're the one overreacting, like you're the one making it a competition. But deep down, you know what you see. You know what you said. You know what they're doing. And they know too. That's why they keep doing it. It's not ignorance. It's strategy. They know that if they keep blurring the lines, eventually you'll stop correcting them. You'll stop sharing. You'll stop speaking your truth around them. And that's what they want. They want you to shrink so they can feel tall. They want to silence your insight so they can claim it without resistance. That's how their ego survives. By consuming the brilliance of others and dressing it up as their own. They're emotional vampires. They feed off your mental clarity, your strength, your vision, and leave you drained and doubting yourself. And if you let them, they'll do it every time. Because they're not stupid in the way people think. They're stubborn. And stubbornness is a form of stupidity when it refuses to grow. When it rejects truth. When it prioritizes pride over principle. You can't educate someone who already thinks they know everything. You can't reason with someone who cares more about appearances than progress. You can't connect with someone who mimics connection just to gain leverage. So stop handing your voice to people who only want to wear it. Stop arguing with those who aren't there to understand, but to steal, to twist, to manipulate. You're not crazy for noticing it. You're not arrogant for calling it out. You're not weak for being tired of it. You're wise for walking away. Because your brilliance deserves more than being echoed without credit. Your mind deserves more than being weaponized in someone else's ego game. Your ideas deserve to breathe, not to be hijacked. You're not here to convince them. You're here to protect your clarity, protect your peace, and stop setting yourself on fire to keep their empty confidence warm. You ever notice how certain people just can't seem to handle your growth? You level up, and suddenly, they're uncomfortable. Not because you've changed in a bad way, but because your evolution highlights everything they're not doing. You can see it in their face when you share your wins. Their smile doesn't reach their eyes. You mention a breakthrough or achievement, and they shift the topic, or worse, they downplay it. That's good for you, they say, while their tone makes it clear it's not. These are the people who only liked you when you were smaller. They could handle you when you were struggling, insecure, unsure of yourself. But the moment you found your voice, your direction, your purpose, they started to pull away or push back. You don't need a degree in psychology to spot it. When people stop clapping, it's not always because you're doing something wrong. Sometimes it's because you're doing something right. And what you're doing, growing, healing, choosing better, it's forcing them to look at the parts of themselves they've been avoiding. That makes them uncomfortable. That makes them defensive. So instead of celebrating you, they start subtly competing. They inject little jabs into conversations. They mention how lucky you are. They suggest you've changed, as if growth is betrayal, as if your progress is an attack on their stagnation. But here's the truth. They never really supported you. They tolerated you. They were comfortable with you as long as you were playing small, as long as your light didn't make theirs look dim. That's the hallmark of a certain kind of person. Someone who pretends to be on your team, but secretly needs you to stay stuck so they can feel superior. And when you finally step into your power, they don't know how to handle it, so they back off. Or worse, they start acting out. Passive aggression, sarcasm, withdrawal. They stop showing up when it matters. They don't ask how you're doing anymore, or they only reach out when they want something. You can't argue with someone like that. Because it's not about logic. It's not about misunderstanding. It's about them being unwilling to accept that you've outgrown the version of yourself they were comfortable with. And instead of growing with you, they resist. They rebel. They retreat. They label you arrogant. They say you've changed. As if staying broken would have been better. As if being stagnant was more loyal. But real loyalty isn't about staying stuck together. Real loyalty is growing beside someone, even when it challenges you. Real loyalty is cheering from the front row, even when their progress makes you reflect on your own. Some people aren't built for that. They don't have the self-awareness or the emotional maturity to admit they're uncomfortable. So they mask it with attitude. They pretend it's something you did wrong. They throw shade when all you did was rise. And the saddest part is, you probably wanted to bring them with you. You probably wanted to share the journey, the wins, the growth. You probably gave them every chance to be part of your new season. But they chose bitterness over support. They chose ego over evolution. And now here you are, questioning yourself, wondering if you did something wrong. Wondering if maybe you were too loud, too focused, too ambitious. But hear this, your growth is not the problem. Your glow is not offensive. Your peace is not too much. What's too much is pretending to shrink so they can feel tall. What's too much is editing yourself so they don't feel left behind. You're not responsible for how your success makes someone else feel when they're unwilling to grow. You're not obligated to hold yourself back just to keep them comfortable. You will never be too much for the right people. The right people will clap for you even when they're struggling. The right people will use your progress as inspiration, not ammunition. The right people will ask how you did it, not try to discredit it. And when you find yourself in a room with people who go quiet when you shine, it's time to change the room. It's time to stop defending your progress to people who refuse to grow. It's time to stop having circular arguments with people who only supported a weaker version of you. Because they're not confused. They're just committed to misunderstanding you so they can stay in control. The people who love the broken you will not always love the healed you. And that's okay. Let them fall away. Let their silence be the boundary. Let their distance make room for new connections. Ones rooted in truth, not control. Respect, not resentment. Growth, not jealousy. You don't have to argue. You don't have to explain. You don't have to apologize for evolving. Just keep walking. Just keep rising. Let their discomfort be their own. You're not here to dim your light to soothe someone else's fear. You're here to become who you were always meant to be. Whether they can handle it or not, there's a difference between seeking truth and seeking control. Most people don't realize this. They walk into an argument thinking they're being rational, but deep down all they want is dominance. They don't care about clarity. They care about being right. They want to win the conversation, not understand it. And if you're not careful, you'll get dragged into their chaos thinking you're building clarity, when in reality you're just feeding someone's fragile ego. The trap is subtle. It begins with something small, a misunderstanding, a misquoted statement, a disagreement over facts. But quickly, it becomes a power struggle. They interrupt. They raise their voice. They start pointing fingers, twisting your words, and suddenly you're not having a conversation anymore. You're playing defense in a verbal war you didn't even start. You think you're going to find common ground, so you try to stay calm. You try to be the bigger person. You keep explaining. You keep clarifying. But no matter how clear you are, it's never enough. Because they're not listening to understand. They're waiting for a pause just to jump back in and overpower. They aren't trying to find the truth. They're trying to protect their pride. They feel attacked simply because you dared to question something they said. And in their mind, your ability to think critically is a threat. Your emotional control is a challenge to their instability. So they flip the script. They mock your calm. They call you cold. They try to bait you into reacting, into lowering your standards so the playing field feels even again. That's how you know it's not a conversation anymore. It's a competition. And if you don't step back, you'll waste hours trying to prove yourself to someone who isn't even qualified to hold the discussion. They're not interested in understanding your point of view. They're interested in making you look small. The more you try to explain, the more they twist your words. The more honest you get, the more defensive they become. The goalpost keeps moving. You provide evidence, they change the topic. You stay calm, they get louder. You ask questions, they get angry. They need to feel like the smartest person in the room, even if it means ignoring reality, even if it means losing the relationship. They don't care about solutions. They care about control. And if you have a strong mind, a clear voice, or firm boundaries, you're going to attract these kinds of people more often than you think, because to them, you represent everything they wish they could be. Confident, direct, unshaken. And rather than rising to your level, they'd rather drag you down to theirs. So they argue not to understand, but to dominate. They use sarcasm instead of logic, emotion instead of reason, volume instead of substance. And they get frustrated when you don't break, when you don't stoop, when you don't give them the reaction they want. That's when they start insulting, dismissing, or accusing you of being difficult. Not because you are, but because you didn't fold. This is the moment where you decide who you are. Are you going to keep engaging with someone who isn't even arguing in good faith? Or are you going to stand in your peace and walk away? Because walking away isn't weakness. It's power. Knowing that you don't need to win an argument to win your peace is power. You don't have to fix every misunderstanding. You don't owe anyone your energy, especially when they've proven they're not capable of handling it with respect. You're not here to manage someone's insecurity. You're not here to entertain emotional manipulation dressed up as discussion. Your responsibility is not to explain your boundaries until they're understood. Your responsibility is to enforce them, especially when they're being tested. Sometimes the smartest thing you can do is go silent. Not because you're giving up, but because you've seen enough. You've seen the patterns. You've felt the drain. And you know better than to waste your time on someone who isn't even interested in mutual respect. Let them believe they won. Let them walk away thinking they got the last word. Let them feel big for a moment. What matters is that you didn't lose yourself trying to match their dysfunction. You didn't abandon your integrity just to feel heard. Because when you argue with someone committed to control, you don't just lose time. You lose parts of yourself. You lose clarity, peace, patience. You walk away mentally exhausted, emotionally depleted, spiritually cluttered. And for what? Just to realize you were never actually arguing with a person. You were arguing with their insecurity, their pride, their need to dominate. Not everyone deserves a response. Not every comment needs a comeback. Some people speak just to hear their own voice. Some argue just to feel alive. Some provoke just to feel powerful. You can't reason with that. You can't educate that. You can't fix that. What you can do is protect your mind, protect your peace, and choose your battles like your life depends on it. Because it does. Your energy is currency. Don't spend it on someone who's bankrupt of accountability. Don't invest it into conversations that only end in chaos. You know who you are. You know what you stand for. You don't need to scream to be right. You don't need to fight to prove a point. Sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is walk away in silence and let your peace speak volumes louder than their noise ever could.